I found someone who makes me happy, Richard said coldly, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder as he pushed the divorce papers across the polished cherry wood of our dining table. It was the same table we had picked out together years ago, right after his company finally started to become profitable. I signed them with a smile, even as my heart felt like it was shattering into a million pieces. What Richard didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that I had been meticulously plotting my next move for months. Before we dive in, I want to thank you for joining me for another story of justice served. If you've ever felt underestimated or made to feel invisible in your own life, you're going to connect with Clara's journey. If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing. It's free and helps us bring more of these empowering tales to light. Now let's get into the story of a marriage that came apart at the seams and the woman who stitched her life back together. It all began with a receipt, a single flimsy slip of paper that would unravel 2.5 decades of my life. I was doing the laundry, a ritual I had performed with quiet devotion every Sunday for 24 years, when I found it balled up in the pocket of his suit jacket. The Crestwood Inn, a room for two, complete with champagne service and chocolate-covered strawberries. The date stamped at the bottom was our anniversary. While I had been at home picking at leftover Chinese takeout and nursing a bottle of wine I'd bought to mark the occasion by myself, Richard had been celebrating with someone else. I wish I could say I stormed into his study and confronted him then and there. But that's not what happened. Instead, I carefully smoothed the receipt, folded it neatly, and tucked it right back where I'd found it, before I continued folding his collection of expensive designer shirts, the ones I had ironed to a perfect crisp finish for more than 20 years. And then I caught it, a subtle, lingering perfume that was definitely not mine. It was a heavy, opulent scent, something with notes of orchid and sandalwood. It was so different from the light, clean rose fragrance I had worn every day since we met in college. That evening, I watched Richard from across the dinner table. I studied him as he obsessively checked his phone every few minutes, a small secret smile playing on his lips as he read texts that were clearly not from me. I wondered, when did I become so invisible to him? Was it a slow, gradual process, like hair turning gray, or was there one specific moment when he looked at me and no longer saw the woman he had promised to love and cherish for the rest of his life? "How are things going with the Morrison account?" I asked, my voice casual as I mentioned his biggest client. "Fine," he mumbled, his eyes still glued to his phone screen. "Just a few loose ends Isabel is tying up for me." Isabel, his new executive assistant. 28 years old with perfect hair, a closet full of sharp business suits, and an MBA from Wharton. I had met her briefly at the company Christmas party about 6 months earlier. I'd noticed then how she hung on his every word, how her laughter at his jokes was just a little too loud. The way her hand lingered on his arm when she spoke to him, I had dismissed my discomfort as simple jealousy at the time. Now I wondered if I had just been willfully, desperately blind. My entire adult life had been poured into Sterling Financial Group. While we were dating in our senior year of college, Richard had laid out his grand vision for launching his own financial consulting firm. "We'll build it together, Clara," he'd promised, flashing that impossibly charming smile that always used to make my heart race. "With your business degree and my connections, we'll be unstoppable." And for a while, we were. I put my own plans for law school on the back burner to help him get the company off the ground. For the first 5 years, I worked right alongside him, unpaid, of course. We were, as he framed it, investing in our future. I drafted business proposals. I networked at mind-numbing industry conferences. I stayed up until the early hours of the morning poring over contracts. When we could finally afford to hire actual employees, I gracefully stepped back into the role of the supportive wife. "You've done more than enough, darling," Richard had assured me, patting my hand. "Now you can focus on making our home perfect." And I did. I hosted flawless dinner parties that charmed his clients and partners. I joined the right charity boards to elevate our social status. I became the quintessential corporate wife, always smiling, always agreeable, always present. All the while, my own ambitions were gathering dust, much like the business degree hanging in my home office, an office I hadn't genuinely used in nearly 20 years. But somewhere along the line, Richard's we had quietly, deliberately become I. It was his success, his company, his accomplishments. The woman who had helped him write his very first business plan was now simply his wife. And eventually, I was reduced to little more than an accessory to be displayed at company functions. This systematic exclusion happened so gradually that I barely noticed it as it was happening. First, I was no longer invited to the quarterly strategy meetings. Then, Richard stopped discussing new clients or potential deals with me. By our 15th anniversary, he had opened a separate business bank account to which I had no access. It's just to simplify our taxes, he had explained with a casual wave of his hand. I accepted each of these changes, each small erosion of our partnership, with the quiet grace that was expected of me. About 3 years ago, something in Richard shifted more noticeably. The late nights at the office became more frequent. The essential business trips multiplied. He installed a new fingerprint lock on his home office door. Corporate security protocols, he'd claimed. His phone was never, ever left unattended, and he started taking calls in hushed, urgent tones on our back patio, ending conversations abruptly the moment I entered the room. I began to pay closer attention to the small details. Credit card statements arrived showing dinners for two at expensive restaurants we had never been to together. I found a second, undeclared cell phone while looking for batteries in a drawer of his desk. I saw email notifications pop up on his laptop screen from accounts I didn't recognize. The finances didn't add up either. The income Richard declared on our joint tax returns seemed completely disconnected from our increasingly lavish lifestyle. The new vacation home in Vail, the speedboat, the growing collection of vintage cars. When I casually asked about a particular investment that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, Richard just patted my hand condescendingly. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about the complicated stuff, Clara. I've got it all handled." That one patronizing dismissal was the spark. It awakened something in me that had been dormant for years. I started paying much closer attention to the company financials that occasionally came through our home fax machine. I noticed discrepancies, large sums of money moving through a series of shell companies, highly questionable deductions, and revenue streams that seemed to disappear before they ever made it onto the official reports. Still, I might have continued my silent, passive observation indefinitely if it weren't for what happened last month. Richard had forgotten his tablet at home, an act of unprecedented carelessness for a man who guarded his digital life like a fortress. A notification lit up the screen while I was dusting a nearby table. Meeting confirmed. The Crestwood Inn, 8 p.m. tonight. I didn't plan to follow him. I really didn't. But 24 years of accumulated doubts, dismissals, and quiet humiliations pushed me into my car that evening. I parked across the street and watched as Richard checked in, looking nervously over his shoulder like a common criminal. 30 minutes later, Isabel arrived wearing a sleek black dress that seemed to highlight everything I felt I had lost to age and resignation I didn't get out of the car. I didn't scream or cause a scene. Instead, I drove home in complete silence, a strange and profound calm settling over me. The betrayal was a physical ache, of course, but the certainty, the final undeniable proof, was almost a relief. Now I understood. Now I could see everything with perfect clarity. That night, I began my research, not just into their sordid affair, but deep into the company's finances. I created a private, untraceable email account. I started photographing documents late at night. I discreetly recorded conversations. I reached out to an old friend from my college days who now specialized in financial forensics. For 3 solid months, I built my case, all while flawlessly playing the part of the oblivious, devoted wife. And when Richard finally worked up the nerve to discard me for his younger, more pliable model, I was ready. I signed those divorce papers with a genuine smile, not because I was strong in that moment, but because I knew exactly what was coming. The very next day, his company would receive an anonymous, detailed tip about tax fraud, $32 million worth. The IRS would be raiding his office within hours. Sometimes revenge doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, patient and meticulous, gathering its strength in the shadows. That morning, hours before the IRS would receive my meticulously compiled evidence, I was awakened by the sound of Richard's expensive Italian leather shoes clicking across our marble foyer. He had supposedly been staying at the office for the past 3 nights to sort things out, but I knew better. The Crestwood Inn surely had his credit card on file by now. I pulled my silk robe tightly around myself and walked down the grand staircase, finding him in our kitchen. He wasn't alone. A thin, severe-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses was seated at our island counter, a thick leather portfolio open in front of him. "Clara," Richard said, his voice all business, completely devoid of any warmth. "This is Martin Vance, my attorney, not our attorney, the man we had used for estate planning for 2 decades." His attorney. The distinction was a deliberate cut, the first of many to come. I nodded politely while measuring out coffee grounds for my morning brew, maintaining the facade of domestic normalcy that had become second nature to me. "Would either of you care for some coffee?" "We don't have time," Richard replied sharply. He was wearing his power suit, a custom-tailored charcoal gray number from Manhattan. He reserved it for closing major deals. How fitting, I thought, that he'd wear it to close out our marriage. Martin Vance cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sterling, we have some matters to discuss." He pulled a document from his portfolio and slid it across the cool granite of our kitchen island, the exact spot where, 20 years earlier, we had popped a bottle of champagne when Richard landed his first 6-figure contract. I had surprised him with his favorite meal that night, and we'd made love right there on the counter, drunk on success and the intoxicating feeling of a shared future. The divorce papers stared up at me, their text sterile and official. Richard still wouldn't meet my eyes. "I've been unhappy for some time, Clara," he began, reciting what was clearly a well-rehearsed speech. His hands were still, not fidgeting the way they always did when he spoke from the heart. This was Richard in full negotiation mode. Calculated, controlled, and utterly convincing. 24 years is a long time, I said quietly, tracing the edge of the papers with my finger. "Too long to stay in something that isn't working," he retorted. "We've grown apart. We want different things." I noticed he was standing by the door, physically keeping his distance as if he expected me to become hysterical or start throwing things. The Richard who once knew me so well now had absolutely no idea who I was. The real me, the one who had been meticulously plotting while he was carrying on his affair, remained completely invisible to him. "The settlement is more than fair," Martin Vance interjected, pushing a separate document toward me. "Mr. Sterling is prepared to be quite generous." I skimmed the terms while taking a slow sip of my coffee. The generous offer was anything but. The beach house in the Carolinas was to be sold, with Richard keeping 70% of the proceeds. Our primary residence, this house that I had decorated and managed for over 2 decades, would be his entirely. With a clause giving me 60 days to relocate, I would receive a one-time lump sum payment that amounted to roughly 3 years of Richard's declared income. Most tellingly, the agreement stipulated that I would relinquish all claims to his business ventures, including any future earnings from investments made during our marriage. "I helped you establish Sterling Financial," I said, looking directly at Richard. For the first time, I put my career on hold. "I worked without a salary for 5 years. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by a cool, practiced detachment. "That was a long time ago, Clara. The company's growth over the past 15 years has had nothing to do with you, except it did. I knew about the Henderson acquisition that had doubled their market share, a deal that only happened because I had befriended Mrs. Henderson at a charity gala. I knew about the government contract he'd secured after I spent months coaching him on his presentation and rewriting his proposals. I knew about the initial seed investors, who only came on board because of my father's connections. I found someone who makes me happy, Richard continued, glancing at his watch. Isabel and I. Your executive assistant, I stated flatly. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Isabel understands the demands of my position. She shares my vision for the future. What he really meant was she's 28 and thoroughly impressed by his wealth. She hasn't seen him fail or doubt himself. She believes the polished mythology of Richard Sterling, the self-made man, without understanding the messy, collaborative reality of how our success was actually built. She's young, I observed, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. It's not about age, he snapped, a little too defensively. It's about connection, about finding someone who sees the real me. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I almost laughed. The real Richard had vanished years ago, replaced by this carefully constructed persona of untouchable corporate success. He couldn't even recognize how rehearsed and cliched he sounded, delivering lines that unfaithful men have been using for generations. Martin Vance shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze darting between us. Perhaps Mrs. Sterling would like some time to review the documents with her own attorney. That won't be necessary, I replied, reaching for the Mont Blanc pen Richard had given me for our 15th anniversary. I understand perfectly. Their surprise was palpable. They had clearly expected tears, recriminations, maybe even some desperate bargaining. They had prepared for a dramatic scene. Instead, I signed each page with a practiced, pleasant smile, the very same one I had perfected at hundreds of corporate functions over the years. I wish you happiness, Richard, I said, and I meant it more than he could ever possibly understand. By the following afternoon, his entire world would come crashing down like a house of cards. Martin Vance gathered the signed documents, a look of clear puzzlement on his face at my easy cooperation. Richard seemed simultaneously relieved and suspicious. You can stay in the house until you find somewhere suitable, he offered, a weak, belated gesture toward generosity now that I had surrendered so completely. That's kind of you, I said, holding his gaze until he was the first to look away. After they left, I poured myself another cup of coffee and allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to feel the grief. Not for losing Richard, but for the years I had lost being Mrs. Sterling instead of just Clara. Then I got to work. That night was the last I would ever spend in our bed. Sleep was out of the question as I spread my collection of documents across the antique writing desk in my bedroom. There were tax returns showing inexplicable discrepancies, bank statements from Cayman Island accounts, corporate ledgers with convenient errors that always benefited Richard. I had photographic evidence of cash payments to building inspectors and printed emails discussing creative accounting practices that flagrantly crossed both ethical and legal lines. For 3 years, I had been gathering this evidence while pretending I didn't understand the complexities of corporate finance. Every time Richard had patronizingly told me not to worry my pretty head about business matters, I had added another document to my secret collection. Every time he had excluded me from a meeting I should have attended, I found another piece of the puzzle. By dawn, my eyes were burning from lack of sleep, but my resolve was as solid as steel. I organized the final package of evidence, encrypting the digital files and composing the email that would land in the inbox of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division at precisely 9 a.m. I included specific details about $32 million in fraudulent deductions, hidden income streams, and deliberate misrepresentations on tax filings spanning 8 consecutive years. As the sun began to rise, I showered and dressed with care, selecting a simple blue dress that had once been Richard's favorite. Today marked the end of our marriage, but it also marked the beginning of my reclamation. By sunset, Richard would finally understand the true cost of underestimating the woman who had stood silently in his shadow for 24 years. My plan had actually begun 3 months earlier, long before Richard presented me with those divorce papers. The day after I discovered his affair with Isabel, I drove 30 miles to a public library in a neighboring county. I couldn't risk using our home computer or any of my personal devices. Richard had insisted on installing invasive security software on everything we owned after a supposed corporate hack a few years back. The elderly librarian barely glanced up from her crossword puzzle as I signed in for a computer using my maiden name, Clara Davis. I chose a terminal in the far corner, my back to the wall, and created a new anonymous email address, truthfinder2023@gmail.com. Untraceable. Perfect. That first day, I uploaded only 3 documents, copies of tax returns from 2018 that showed clear, undeniable discrepancies between his reported income and actual bank deposits. I knew I had to be methodical. If this was going to work, the evidence had to be airtight and irrefutable. For weeks afterward, I developed a strict routine. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Richard had standing dinner meetings that he claimed routinely ran late. I told him I had joined a book club. He was so profoundly disinterested in my personal activities by that point that he never questioned it. Instead of discussing literature with a group of suburban housewives, I spent those evenings at different libraries across the county, patiently building my case, piece by piece. One particularly rainy Tuesday, I sat in my parked car, my hands trembling as I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Maria Jenkins speaking, answered a brisk, professional voice. Maria? It's Clara Sterling from Westlake College. There was a momentary silence, which was then broken by a voice filled with genuine warmth. Clara? Oh my God, it's been 5 years since your last Christmas card? How are you? I swallowed hard against the lump forming in my throat. I need some advice, Maria, professional advice. It's complicated. Maria and I had been roommates for all 4 years of college. While I had followed Richard into his risky business ventures, she had pursued a career in forensic accounting, eventually becoming a highly respected specialist with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We had drifted apart over the years, mostly my fault as I retreated further and further into Richard's world, but we had always maintained a loose, occasional contact. This sounds serious, she said, her tone shifting from friendly to professional. Do you want to meet? We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in Rockville, nearly an hour's drive from my home. Maria looked exactly as I remembered. Practical haircut, sensible shoes, and intelligent, observant eyes that missed nothing. I felt a sharp pang of regret for letting our friendship fade. Before you tell me anything, she said after we ordered our coffees, you need to understand that I'm bound by certain professional obligations. I know, I replied. That's why I need your guidance. Hypothetically speaking, of course. What would be the proper procedure for documenting potential tax fraud without becoming implicated yourself? Her eyebrows rose just slightly. This hypothetical situation, would it involve someone close to you? A spouse, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. A spouse who has systematically hidden income, created false business expenses, and transferred funds to offshore accounts for nearly a decade. Maria's expression remained perfectly neutral, but her eyes softened with a deep, unspoken understanding. Innocent spouse relief exists for a reason. Clara, many partners genuinely have no idea what their significant others are doing financially. And what if that spouse, what if they suspected something was wrong but didn't have concrete proof until very recently? She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Document everything from the moment of discovery forward. Show that you took reasonable steps to act once you became aware. The IRS is very good at distinguishing between willful blindness and genuine ignorance. Over the next hour, Maria, without ever directly advising me to report Richard, laid out the intricacies of whistleblower provisions, documentation requirements, and the critical importance of establishing a clear, defensible timeline. She never once asked for specifics, thus maintaining her plausible deniability, but she provided me with the exact framework I needed. "Whatever you decide to do," she said as we parted ways, "protect yourself first." That conversation gave me the confidence to take my next crucial step. I contacted Professor Alistair Finch, who had taught my business law class during my brief stint in law school, before I dropped out to help Richard launch his company. Now semi-retired, Professor Finch agreed to meet me for lunch, clearly curious about the student who had shown such promise before vanishing from the program. "Innocent spouse relief isn't automatic," he explained, after listening to my carefully worded hypothetical situation. "You'll need to demonstrate that you had no actual knowledge or reason to know about the understatements on the tax returns, even if we filed jointly," I asked, "especially then. But there's a reasonableness standard that is applied. The IRS considers your educational background, your financial condition, and whether there were lavish or unusual expenditures compared to your normal lifestyle." He studied me over the top of his glasses. "Your background in business and accounting might work against you, but your gradual, documented exclusion from company matters definitely helps your case." With the guidance from both Maria and Professor Finch, I refined my approach. I began methodically and quietly separating my finances from Richard's without raising his suspicion. I opened a new bank account at a credit union using my maiden name and gradually transferred small amounts from my personal allowance account. I documented every single instance when Richard refused to discuss company finances with me, recording dates and his exact condescending phrases in a journal I kept locked in the trunk of my car. Meanwhile, I continued to gather evidence. Richard's carelessness grew in direct proportion to the intensity of his relationship with Isabel. He started leaving sensitive financial statements on his desk in his home office. He forgot to lock his computer, and sometimes he even discussed questionable business practices on speakerphone, completely unaware that I was within earshot in the next room. Each one of his slips provided another crucial piece for my growing file. The trickiest part was maintaining our daily routine while silently preparing for its complete and total collapse. I still cooked Richard's favorite meals. I maintained our shared social calendar, and I played the role of the devoted, smiling wife at company functions. I even endured Isabel's presence at the annual company picnic, smiling politely while she stood just a little too close to my husband, her hand casually touching his arm as they laughed at some private joke. On the morning after I signed the divorce papers, I made my final preparations. I drove to a small internet cafe 3 towns over, paid cash for an hour of computer time, and uploaded the complete annotated dossier to the secure IRS portal. 8 years of systematic tax fraud, multiple shell companies, hidden accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland, falsified expense reports, cash transactions deliberately structured to avoid reporting requirements, properties purchased through anonymous LLCs. The evidence was overwhelming. $32 million in fraudulent activity, all carefully documented and cross-referenced. I included a detailed timeline showing Richard's systematic efforts to conceal his actions from me, along with my own documentation of my gradual exclusion from all company matters I filed for innocent spouse relief, simultaneously through a separate channel, following Maria's guidance to the letter to protect myself. As I hit send on the anonymous tip, I felt no sense of triumph, only a hollow feeling of completion. This wasn't just about revenge, not entirely. It was about justice. It was about consequences. It was about reclaiming some small measure of dignity from a man who had discarded me after 24 years as if I were nothing more than a worn-out piece of furniture. 3 hours later, Richard sent a text to let me know he had moved the last of his essential belongings to his temporary apartment. We both knew he meant Isabel's place. He asked if I needed anything before he left the house keys. I replied with a single word: No. By morning, his entire world would change forever. The irony wasn't lost on me that after years of dismissing my business acumen, it would be my meticulous documentation and quiet diligence that would bring down his entire empire. The woman he so casually underestimated would be the architect of his downfall. I slept surprisingly well that night, better than I had in months. When my alarm chimed at 6:30 a.m., I rose with a sense of purpose, dressed in a simple gray suit, professional but understated, and drove downtown. Sterling Financial Group occupied the top 3 floors of the Meridian Building, a gleaming glass and steel structure that dominated the city's skyline. I parked in a public garage 2 blocks away and walked to Maggie's Cafe, a small diner that offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the building's main entrance. "The usual Mrs. Sterling?" asked Maggie herself, a 60-something woman who'd been serving downtown professionals for decades. "Just Clara today," I replied with a genuine smile, and yes, the usual. I took a seat by the window and sipped my latte, watching the morning rush of employees streaming into the building. Richard would arrive at precisely 8:15, just as he had for 20 years, early enough to appear dedicated, but late enough to make an entrance. His senior staff would already be there, preparing for the 8:30 a.m. meeting that started every single day. At 9:47 a.m., much faster than I had anticipated, 3 unmarked black sedans pulled up to the curb. 8 men and women in dark suits emerged, carrying briefcases and document boxes. Despite their plain business attire, something about their synchronized, efficient movements screamed federal agents. 2 uniformed police officers accompanied them, remaining posted by the entrance as the others proceeded inside. My phone buzzed at 9:52 a.m. It was Richard. I silenced it and continued to watch. Through the massive glass walls of the lobby, I could see the building's security guards frantically trying to contact someone upstairs. More calls came in. Richard again, then his personal assistant, Claudia, then the company's general counsel. I let every single call go to voicemail. At 10:14, I saw Richard himself burst from the elevator into the lobby. His face was a mask of panic and disbelief as he confronted the officers who were blocking the main exit. Even from across the street, I could read his body language, the aggressive gesturing, the entitled indignation, and then the gradual, visible deflation as the grim reality of the situation finally set in. My phone buzzed one more time. This time I answered. "What the hell is happening?" Richard's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "The IRS and the FBI are here with search warrants. They're seizing computers, files. They're interviewing my staff." "That sounds serious," I replied, my voice perfectly calm. "What do they want?" "They're claiming tax fraud, securities violations, and money laundering. It's absolute nonsense. Someone has made false accusations." His breathing was ragged and erratic. "I need you to come down here. They're asking questions about our joint finances." "I'm rather busy today, Richard." The divorce papers were quite clear about our separation. "This isn't about the divorce," he shouted, then immediately lowered his voice to a hiss. "Clara, please, I need you. 20 years of building this company. I can't lose everything." The raw desperation in his voice might have moved me once. Now it just felt like delayed justice. "I have an appointment at 11, I said truthfully. "I'll see what I can do afterward." My appointment was, indeed, at 11, with Special Agent David Chen at the Federal Building 6 blocks away. After an informal call earlier that morning confirming receipt of my whistleblower filing, he had requested an in-person meeting to discuss my claim for innocent spouse relief Agent Chen was younger than I'd expected. Perhaps 40, with kind eyes that stood in stark contrast to his precise, methodical questioning. After establishing that our conversation was being recorded, he carefully led me through my history with Sterling Financial Group. "When did you first become suspicious of financial irregularities, Mrs. Sterling?" I described my gradual exclusion from all company matters, the lavish lifestyle that far exceeded our reported income, the strange calls, and the hidden documents. And why didn't you report these suspicions earlier? This was the critical question, the one that would determine whether I was an innocent spouse or a complicit partner. I had suspicions. Agent Chen. Not evidence, I explained. Richard always told me the business was too complex for me to understand. After years of hearing that, I started to believe it myself. I showed him the journal where I had documented specific instances when Richard had refused to discuss finances, the email exchanges where he had deflected my questions, and the statements from the separate accounts to which I had no access. You have a business degree, Chen noted, his eyes scanning my evidence. You helped start the company. Yes, I said, but Richard systematically pushed me out of all operations as soon as we could afford to hire other people. He controlled all the financial information. When we filed our taxes each year, he would present me with only the signature pages, never the complete returns. By the end of our 2-hour meeting, Agent Chen seemed satisfied with my cooperation, though he maintained a professional neutrality regarding the outcome of my innocent spouse claim. We'll need to speak again, he said, as we concluded. In the meantime, please do not discuss this investigation with anyone, especially not your husband. As I left the federal building, my phone showed 27 missed calls from Richard, along with dozens of text messages that ranged from pleading to threatening. I scrolled through them while sitting in my car. Please call me immediately. This is all a misunderstanding I can explain. I need you to tell them you handled the household accounts. If they freeze our assets, we'll both have nothing. I swear I will make this divorce hell if you don't help me. The final message, sent just 15 minutes earlier, chilled me to the bone. You did this, didn't you? This is your revenge. I didn't respond to any of them. 2 days later, Agent Chen called to request another meeting. This time, he wasn't alone. Special Agent Laura Morales from the Securities and Exchange Commission joined us, along with an assistant U.S. attorney named Peter Garrison. Mrs. Sterling, we've made some significant discoveries since we last spoke, Agent Chen began, his tone more formal with the others present. We believe you should be aware of them, as they may directly impact your financial situation. Agent Morales opened a folder. We have determined that Isabel Clark wasn't just involved romantically with your husband. She appears to have been an active participant in manipulating the company's financial records. They showed me printed emails between Richard and Isabel discussing creative accounting solutions, with some exchanges dating back 3 years, almost to the moment she had joined the company. In one particularly damning exchange, Richard had instructed Isabel to make sure Clara never sees these accounts, to which she had replied, "Complete discretion." Guaranteed Ms. Clark received substantial, undeclared bonuses that were tied to the periods of most significant financial manipulation. Garrison added, she also received gifts, jewelry, a car, a down payment on her condo, that correlate with specific instances of fraudulent reporting. The betrayal shouldn't have hurt. I had already discovered Richard's infidelity. I had already signed the divorce papers. But something about seeing their conspiracy laid out in black and white reopened wounds I thought had already begun to seal. Then came the real shock. The most concerning discovery, Agent Chen continued, involves the employee pension fund. He explained that Richard had illegally diverted approximately $4.3 million from the company's employee retirement accounts, replacing proper, secure investments with essentially worthless shares in his own shell companies. Dozens of loyal employees, people I knew by name, people who had attended our holiday parties for years and had trusted Richard with their futures, would have discovered their retirement savings had been completely decimated right when they needed them most. The company had a matching program, I whispered, the room starting to spin. People put their life savings into those accounts. Yes, Agent Morales confirmed grimly, and it appears these diversions began shortly after Ms. Clark took over management of those funds. The sheer enormity of Richard's betrayal finally hit me. It wasn't just his betrayal of me, but of everyone who had ever placed their trust in him. Loyal employees who had worked nights and weekends to help him build his dream clients, who had put their faith in his financial guidance. My own parents, who had invested a portion of their retirement funds in his very first venture. To my own deep embarrassment, I broke down sobbing right there in front of the 3 federal officers. Not delicate, quiet tears, but ugly, racking sobs that came from a deep, wounded place inside me. "I'm sorry," I managed to gasp between breaths. I knew he was defrauding the government, but I never imagined he would steal from his own employees. Agent Morales silently pushed a box of tissues toward me, while Agent Chen poured me a glass of water. They waited patiently as I struggled to regain my composure. "Mrs. Sterling," Garrison said gently, once I had calmed down, "your cooperation and your meticulous documentation have been invaluable. Based on everything we have seen, I will be fully supporting your innocent spouse relief claim." As I drove home that evening, Richard called again. "This time," I answered. "They're saying I stole from the pension fund," he said without any preamble, his voice hollow and defeated. "They're freezing everything. They took my passport." I remained silent, letting the full gravity of his situation sink in for him. "Did you know?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "About the whistleblower?" "Goodbye, Richard," I said quietly, and ended the call. Justice, I was discovering, didn't feel like triumph. It felt like mourning. Mourning for the man I thought I had married, for the years I had lost, and for all the innocent people who had been caught in the crossfire of his insatiable greed. The weeks that followed Richard's arrest passed in a blur of legal meetings and endless paperwork. My innocent spouse relief claim moved forward with surprising efficiency, bolstered by Agent Chen's strong support and the mountain of evidence I had provided. The IRS and SEC had frozen most of our joint assets, but my attorney managed to secure an emergency living expenses allowance for me, which gave me the breathing room I needed to plan my next steps. I left our sprawling suburban home without a single shred of regret, taking only my personal belongings and a few family heirlooms, the designer furniture, the expensive artwork selected solely to impress Richard's clients, the state-of-the-art kitchen gadgets I had never even used. I left it all behind, shedding the trappings of a life that had slowly but surely suffocated me. My temporary residence was a modest hotel suite downtown, paid for with the small emergency fund I had painstakingly established during those months of secret preparation. Each morning, I would walk to a nearby cafe, order a coffee, and make lists of all the things I needed to do to rebuild my life from scratch at the age of 55. On one particularly sunny Tuesday, I found myself staring at the contact information for George Caldwell, my former supervisor at Davis Caldwell Accounting, the firm where I had worked before leaving to help Richard start his business. On impulse, I dialed the number, half expecting to reach his assistant, or perhaps learn that he had long since retired. Caldwell speaking, came the familiar gruff voice. "George, it's Clara Sterling. Well, soon to be Clara Davis again." Clara. The surprise in his voice quickly turned to genuine warmth. "I've been following the news about Sterling Financial terrible business. Are you all right?" That simple, direct question of genuine concern nearly undid me. For 24 years, Richard had only ever asked how I was as a polite prelude to talking about himself. "I'm finding my way," I answered honestly. "Actually, I was wondering if you might have time for a coffee. I could use some professional advice." We met the following day at his firm's offices. George had aged well. His hair was now completely silver, but his handshake was still firm, and his mind as sharp as ever. He listened attentively as I outlined my situation, nodding occasionally but reserving judgment until I had finished. "So," I concluded, "I need to restart my career after a 24-year detour. Any suggestions?" George leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Actually, we have an interesting situation here. Our compliance and fraud detection division has grown significantly in the last few years. We're looking for someone with a unique perspective, Someone who understands how these schemes work from the inside out. You're offering me a job? I asked, stunned. I'm suggesting a conversation with our department head, he clarified with a small smile. Your experience, both professional and personal, would be invaluable. Plus, you always had an uncanny gift for spotting irregularities in financial statements. 2 interviews later, I was employed again for the first time in over 2 decades, with my own office, a title, and a team of colleagues who respected my insights. The profound irony was not lost on me. Richard's financial crimes had inadvertently resurrected the very career I had abandoned for him all those years ago. As my professional life began to stabilize, I had to face another challenge: Richard's arraignment. My attorney advised me that my presence wasn't required, but after considerable reflection, I decided I needed to attend not for revenge or some sick sense of satisfaction, but for the closure I knew I needed to truly move forward. The federal courthouse was an imposing building, all marble and mahogany, designed to intimidate with its sheer grandeur. I sat in the back row, wearing a simple navy dress, no makeup, my wedding ring conspicuously absent from my finger. Richard entered with his court-appointed attorney, his shoulders hunched in an ill-fitting suit that had clearly once been tailored to perfection. Gone were the designer glasses, the expensive watch, and the confident swagger. He looked older, diminished somehow as he scanned the courtroom with nervous, darting eyes. When his gaze finally landed on me, he froze for a moment. Something flickered across his face, not the anger I had expected, but a look of profound sadness, tinged with what appeared to be genuine regret. For the first time in years, it felt like he truly saw me, not as an extension of himself or a convenient support system, but as Clara, a whole and separate person he had methodically erased. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. I returned the gesture, but kept my expressionless. There was nothing left for us to say to each other. The proceedings were brief and procedural. Richard pled not guilty to 17 federal charges, including tax evasion, wire fraud, and employee benefit plan theft. The judge denied bail, given the severity of the charges and the clear flight risk. As they led Richard away in handcuffs, he glanced back at me one last time, a look that seemed to say both, "I'm so sorry," and "How did we ever get here?" I left the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in years, as if I had finally set down a heavy burden I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. 2 months later, I signed the lease on a new downtown apartment. It was a corner unit on the 12th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the entire space in natural light. It was less than a quarter of the size of our former home, but it felt infinitely more comfortable and welcoming. I furnished it simply, with pieces that I truly loved, rather than items selected to impress other people. My books, which had been neglected for years while I focused on Richard's interests, once again filled the shelves. My grandmother's handmade quilt adorned my bed. My collection of beach glass, gathered from vacations Richard had always been too busy to enjoy with me, was proudly displayed in a hand-blown glass bowl by the window. The official letter from the IRS arrived 6 months after Richard's arrest. By then, he had accepted a plea deal, admitting to a reduced number of charges in exchange for his cooperation against others involved in related schemes. Isabel had also struck a deal, turning state's evidence against Richard to minimize her own sentence. I opened the envelope with steady hands. The whistleblower reward was substantial, 15% of the total recovered funds, amounting to just over $4.2 million. The validation was sweet, but the money itself felt almost incidental by that point. I had already reclaimed something far more valuable: my independence, my identity, and my future. That evening, I called Maria, my old college roommate who had provided that crucial initial guidance. "I need to do something meaningful with this money," I told her. "Something that actually matters." 2 weeks later, I filed the paperwork to establish the New Beginnings Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting women who were rebuilding their lives after divorce and financial abuse. The foundation would provide emergency grants, pro bono legal assistance, career counseling, and financial literacy education, all the resources I so desperately wished I'd had during those first terrible, disorienting days after my own marriage collapsed. At the Foundation's very first board meeting, I shared my vision with the diverse group of professionals I had assembled: lawyers, financial advisors, therapists, and community organizers. So many women stay in bad, even dangerous situations because they can't see a way out financially, I explained. We're going to change that. As spring arrived, I settled into my new, fulfilling routines. Mornings at the accounting firm, analyzing complex financial statements and training younger staff to recognize the subtle warning signs of fraud. Afternoons at the foundation, reviewing grant applications and helping to develop new programs. Evenings were often spent on my small balcony, watching the city lights emerge as dusk fell, usually with a good book in my hand, a simple pleasure I had rediscovered. One afternoon, I ran into Richard's former assistant, Claudia, at a cafe near my office. After an initially awkward exchange, she thanked me. "The employees got most of their pension funds back because of you," she said quietly. "No one blames you for what happened." Her words healed a part of me I hadn't even realized was still wounded. I hadn't just taken revenge on Richard. I had inadvertently protected the very people who would have been devastated by his selfish actions. On the 1-year anniversary of the day I signed those divorce papers, I hosted a small dinner party in my new apartment, my first time entertaining in my new home. Maria was there, along with George, my sister who had flown in from Chicago, and 2 new friends I had made through the foundation. As we raised our glasses in a toast, I realized with startling clarity that I wasn't just surviving after Richard. I was thriving. The life I had so carefully rebuilt from the ashes of my failed marriage wasn't a consolation prize. It was the authentic, meaningful life I should have been living all along. End of story.